So I've moved house, I kind of have Wi-Fi, so now it's back to videos. And as I have been deprived of Wi-Fi and being able to make any sort of videos, that means I'm well behind on everything, and I am yet to finish my X-Men series despite I've already seen the New Mutants. So I've just got one more to do before I give my New Mutants review, and that is Dark Phoenix. So Dark Phoenix is the last X-Men, like as a team, film produced by Fox. As we know, there is technically another X-Men movie which just came out, The New Mutants, but that's more of a spin-off. Dark Phoenix follows Jean Grey, who begins to develop incredible powers that corrupt and turn her evil, and now the X-Men must decide if her life is worth more than all of humanity. But does it feel like those stakes are that big? Let's find out. So Dark Phoenix contains a lot of cool X-Men and mutant action throughout it. It's quite consistent on that tone. You know, it starts off with a nice space mission. All the way through it, there's quite a fair bit of action, and it's all pretty good. There's not really anything where you're like, oh, this bit drags, there's not much action. It's a fast-paced movie, and the action is there and it'll keep you entertained. And out of those action scenes, an honourable mention goes to the final act, where there's this whole sequence with a train. Despite it being a reshoot, I thought it was a very cool scene. You get to see all the mutants, all the X-Men use their powers individually, but unfortunately they're the only good things I have to say about it. Now, as I mentioned, this is the last Fox X-Men movie, and it's not the send-off that this franchise deserved. You know, there have been some really poor moments in this franchise and a lot of highs. This doesn't contain some of the worst moments of the series, just overall the quality isn't too great. A YouTuber I watch, he made a good point that this doesn't contain the lows of the franchise, but it also doesn't contain any of the highs. So it's just consistently bland and mediocre throughout the whole movie, which is why I have a lot of other negatives to say. Now, one of the things that bugged me the most is the characters. They've had some nice development in the previous films, especially Charles. But in this movie, him and Raven feel so out of character. Raven just moans the whole time. Charles becomes very selfish. And there's a plotline which kind of makes sense, but the way it's done, he's just so unlikable. Both of them are very unlikable in this movie. Like, this whole movie is about how Jean Grey changes because of the power she gets. There were really some points in this movie where it's just very lazy. It felt like they kind of gave up, and to be fair, they could have with all the reshoots. But one example is just look at the evolution of how Mystique looks in all the X-Men movies. In this movie, it feels like they just grabbed her head, dunked it in some paint, and then let it dry, the hair to dry, because there's no effort done into it. There's none of the small detail. Well, there's some on the forehead, but she just looks so different from everything else, and not like the Mystique we've grown up to see. Now, this is the second attempt at the Phoenix Saga within an X-Men movie, and I think they did the right thing by making a whole movie about it, but the execution is not here at all. They don't present a movie worthy of this title. Although they do some things right, they also go down the same road with a lot of the things that X-Men The Last Stand did, and that's not something you really want to do. On paper, once again, like X-Men Apocalypse, this is up there with some of the hugest stakes, and as I read the synopsis, it's like to save all of humanity, but once again, also like X-Men Apocalypse, it's so underwhelming. It feels so small scaled. Some of the other movies felt like their stakes were a lot higher, even though they're a lot smaller, and you can't blame it on they're a smaller budget, because no, this is a $200 million budget we're talking about. This isn't small. They just didn't know how to use it properly, unlike how the others did. And that's because they didn't develop any of the characters to make you care about them any more than you had in previous movies. If anything, you care about them a bit less. Like I praised in Apocalypse that they actually gave Cyclops some development, which we hadn't seen in previous X-Men movies, but he's just another side character in this movie, nothing for him to stand out of. And for example, Quicksilver, he shows up at the beginning and he completely disappears after the space mission until the very end, when he has some joke at the very end of the movie. So even though they had a huge budget, just the execution felt very minuscule and it wasn't done expertly. But now you do have to take into account there were a lot of reshoots. There were too many similarities with Captain Marvel. You know, they wanted to have the Skrulls as the main villain, but Marvel Studios had those rights, and even without the Skrulls, their movie would have been too similar. You know, shapeshifters, and they were intending to have a battle in space, but they changed it for this train sequence, which I mentioned was a very cool sequence, so That's probably one of the best things about this movie. But the villains just, they're so bland, they're so generic aliens who want to take over the world. They have no character to them, very cliche, and I forgot about them. Even though I saw this movie like a few months ago before rewatching it, I actually forgot who the villains were that were that forgettable. Now, I'm a huge fan of Michael Fassbender. I think he's been great throughout all these X-Men movies, and once again he was good in this movie. However, I feel like having Magneto mixed in with everything felt a bit forced just to have the character in another X-Men movie. You know, there wasn't really a need for him. You could argue that he has a right to be there for what happens in the movie, but overall it felt a bit forced having him there, even though he did bring some life to this disaster. Now, this certainly for me isn't an embarrassing X-Men movie, it's just not a great one. It's just, as I mentioned, there's not really any quality, but there's nothing too embarrassing about it. So this is where I'm changing up my rating system. I'm changing it. I'd normally give it a 5 out of 10, but where I'm going with my rating system now, you can get a more exact score of what I would think. So for this one, I'm going to give it a 59%. So if you're doing that in IMDb, it would be a 5.9, I guess. But yeah, 59% for X-Men Dark Phoenix. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to see any more of my X-Men reviews, I'll leave a clickable playlist up in the corner here. And yes, in the next few days I should be having my New Mutants review as well as my X-Men ranking, so stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next video.